Negotiations thrive on information, and questions are a way to elicit information. So in this video, I want to talk about how to use questions in a negotiation. Questions don't just elicit information, they're a way of dropping ideas into a conversation that is less challenging, less threatening than making statements. Questions are a way of directing attention and steering the direction of a conversation. So as a negotiator, you need to become adept at asking good questions that elicit the information you want and change the direction of the negotiation down a fruitful avenue. But here's something important. Don't ask a question unless you are prepared to take the time to listen to the answer and to listen to it with an open mind. We're going to look at 8 sorts of questions that you can use as a negotiator. And the first is an open question. An open question is a great way to start a dialogue off. An open question sets no constraints on how the other person will respond to it. Tell me about your objectives. All that's doing is raising the topic of objectives and inviting the other person to answer in whatever way they choose. Questions that start with things like what and how and why tend to be open questions, but be aware that it is wise to avoid questions that begin with why. Because why questions are all about values and reasons which are very challenging to somebody. Unless you've got a strong relationship, then why can set you off on the wrong foot. Once you've asked a big open question, or maybe a few, and there's a good dialogue going, and you learn something of value, and the conversation is in the right zone, it's time to narrow the zone down, to either elicit more detailed information or to further focus the direction of the negotiation. And we do that with probing questions, questions that ask for more information about something. How does this work? What in particular you're interested in? Tell me more about. Probing questions select from the wide open arena of the open question one part to focus on and take the conversation down that direction. And of course it is possible, having asked some probing questions, to come back to the answer you got to the open question and then to probe in a new direction. The next type of question is a closed question, and a closed question sets very tight limits on the range of answers which are acceptable. And the classic closed question is a yes or no question. We'll come back to that later on in this video. But be aware that multiple choice or alternate questions are, strictly speaking, closed, in that they close down the range of answers in a very prescriptive way. Do you want A, B, or C? That's a closed question because there is no other answer other than A, B, or C. What's the time? Is a closed question because the only proper answer is the time. We use closed questions to gain precision on our understanding, to confirm what we think we've heard. Closed questions draw a conversation to an end. They tell us we've got to the end of the road on this particular direction. We're confirming where we are. We're gathering data, and they allow us to document something with confidence and certainty. And as a negotiator, they are great for ending a stage in a negotiation and then for documenting the answer you get to the closed question. When we looked at closing a negotiation, we saw that alternate questions are a great way to close. Would you like delivery this week or next week? is an alternates question. It is closed. It invites one of two answers, both of which are satisfactory. The multiple choice question is a great way to get a specific answer to a particular question. The next type of question is a hypothetical question or a reflective question. It sets the question in the context of something which either isn't true or isn't true yet. If we were to do this, what would your response be? Suppose that this happened, how would we deal with it? If we made you this concession, what could you offer in return? What if we did this? All of these hypothetical questions enable you to craft solutions to the kind of tricky problems that we find in negotiations. Of course, in a real negotiation, these hypotheticals need to be rooted in possibility rather than fantasy. But they are a great way of exploring the space of options that you and your counterparty have to look for solutions that you can both agree to. I also want to discuss two types of questions that you should avoid. I'm not going to say never use them because I can't predict every circumstance, but I can't think of a good situation to use either of these types of questions, and the first is a leading question. A leading question presupposes you know the answer and tries to direct the other person to giving the answer that you want. The problem with leading questions, which sound like they might be useful in a negotiating context for directing the negotiation, is that if you have used a leading question to manipulate the other person to giving the answer that you want, then at best you will get the deal, and then later there will be some form of buyer's remorse and they will regret the deal that you've agreed. But more likely they will spot that it's a leading question and they will resent the fact that you tried to manipulate them, and their level of trust for you as a negotiator will go down. Do not use leading questions. Of slightly less intensity, I would also say do not use multiple questions. Multiple questions are questions where you wrap a lot of different questions into one big question. What would happen if we did this? I'd like to suggest that. What would you do then? And what are your thoughts on this other thing? Now, each of those three questions may be a perfectly reasonable question. It's just that by asking them all together, you lose control of the flow of the dialogue. There is a risk that you won't notice that they didn't give you an answer to one of the questions, which of course may be because they forgot, or it may be because it didn't suit them to answer the question. If your brain works in a way that brings multiple questions into your mind, and some people do like to use them, then my advice is, having asked the multiple question, to then note down the three questions that you asked, or the 4 or 5 questions that you asked, and say, now I'd like to focus on the first question that I asked, and read it back as a single question. And when you've heard the answer to that, tick it off and move on to the next. If you do find yourself articulating a multiple question, then convert it into a series of single questions. That way, you've got control of the flow, you can understand what's being said without confusing two different issues, and you can ensure that each question gets the answer that you want. Finally, I'd like to come back to our closed questions that ask for an answer that is either yes or no. And I'd like to think about each of those as a particular style of question, which we can call a yes question and a no question. Let's start with the value of yes questions. Yes questions create a yes habit. If I can get you to say yes to my first question, and then yes to my second question, and then yes to my third question, then maybe you're likely to say yes to my fourth question. You see what I'm doing? Yes questions can be manipulative, and they have got a bad reputation because poor amateur negotiators think that all they have to do is to ask questions to get a yes, and they'll build a rapport, and then when they ask for the deal, they'll get a yes. The right use of yes questions is about building common ground, asking questions that get a yes because you can both agree on them. And the value of common ground is that it builds rapport and it shows that we are working towards a common end. That way it sets the foundation for a good negotiation and therefore for a satisfactory outcome. But if you start to use your yes questions, not just to build rapport and common ground, but to build that kind of habit of saying yes so that it becomes automatic, then you're being manipulative and you should not do that. So what about no questions? Well, no questions grant control. If you ask a question of the other person to which they can happily answer no, they feel the opposite of being manipulated. They feel that by being able to say no, they are in control. That makes them feel very comfortable with you as a negotiator. That also can help build rapport. But my ultimate advice on this is don't try to overthink it. Rather, you should notice the impact of yes and no questions in the natural flow of your negotiations so that your mind can integrate that knowledge and understanding, and you can get better at calibrating whether to frame a question to get a yes answer or to get a no answer. At the start of your negotiating career, it's better to understand people from observing what happens. And later you can start to build that understanding into a framework so that you can ask more carefully crafted questions and get better results. Please do give us a thumbs up if you like this video. There's loads more great management courses content to come, so please subscribe to our channel and hit the bell so you don't miss any of it. I'll look forward to seeing you in the next video, and in the meantime, keep learning.